Jesus, all the way. I'll forever trust in you. Jesus, all the way.
JC24 7.
When I was much younger, which of course wasn't too far away, just the other day, I learned the story of the three little pigs. You remember when the wolf came by and said, I'll huff and puff and blow your house in, whether it was a house of straw, wood, or brick. Surprisingly, however, there are many people who are huffing and puffing and blowing their own houses in, the houses of the flesh. Yes, it's one word we call smoking. Is it really dangerous to your health? How can it affect how you live? Well, we have invited Dr. Larry Griffith to help us unravel, to deal with this intricate matter of smoking. Thank you, Dr. Larry, for joining us on JC24 7.
Thank you, Pastor.
I want to start off with this question about, there's an adage that is oftentimes placed on the screen. The Ministry of Health advises that smoking can be dangerous to your health. Maybe should that be updated to smoking is dangerous to your health?
I think that would be a more accurate reflection of the facts, indeed. When one looks at the reasons that a person will die in our part of the world, repeatedly in the statistics of different countries, you'll see cerebrovascular disease or cardiovascular disease and cancer.
Right.
That is, people who are getting heart attacks, people who are getting strokes, and people who get cancers.
Right.
And when you look at the types of cancers, near the top, cause of death, or at the top will be lung cancer.
Right.
And all three problems, heart attacks, stroke, lung cancer, caused primarily or significantly, I should say, by cigarette smoking. To the point that if one were to quit smoking, if you took away the numbers for people who smoke cigarettes, the numbers would drop by about 30%.
Wow. Wow.
Now, when you look at those top three killers in our part of the world, they statistically outweigh the next 7 causes of death.
Right.
And so if you could drop your risk of getting 1, 2, or 3, your chances of living long is pretty good. And so about 5 million people die all over the world because of cigarette smoking. And that is almost 5 times the population of Trinidad and Tobago dying every year. So I would say it's true that cigarette smoking.
Would it be safe to say that as alcohol consumption is to the liver, so is cigarette smoking to the lungs?
I think that that might sort of minimize the impact that cigarette smoking has. Yes, there is a very, very strong correlation between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. And more than 80% of lung cancers can be linked to cigarette smoking. But the story is just so much greater than that. I mean, lung cancer is not the only cancer that cigarette smoking causes. All in the oropharynx, in the mouth, in the throat, in the esophagus, in the bladder, which of course doesn't come in direct contact with cigarette smoke. Pancreatic cancer are all strongly related to cigarette smoke. And then you have heart disease, you have diabetes links, you have blindness links, and so many other things. So that, you know, while alcohol and liver disease often gets a lot of attention, there are so many areas in one's health that can be negatively impacted by smoking.
I've observed that there are some persons, or most persons, who have the prolonged habit of smoking. They develop these black rings around their lips. What causes that?
Well, I can tell you a part of the reason. And one of the things that comes out of cigarette smoke is carbon monoxide. And carbon monoxide is a very dangerous, toxic gas. In fact, it is the gas that kills people who try to commit suicide by staying in their car in an enclosed area. And carbon monoxide does its baleful duty by holding on to the oxygen that keeps you alive far better than your hemoglobin in your blood can. And so it's an oxygen stealer. And so these people live with lower oxygen levels than an ordinary person would. And when you have hypoxia, as lower oxygen levels in the blood, you tend to get a sort of a bluish, grayish appearance. And that could be part of the reason why they have that.
Let me be a little bit facetious. Is there a safe way of smoking?
I think safe and smoking is a bit of an oxymoron, all right? And the truth of it is that when somebody smokes a cigarette, or a pipe for that matter, the chemical that they're craving really is the nicotine. The nicotine is what gives them that relaxing effect. But in the combustion, there are a number of chemicals that piggyback with the nicotine into your system. And those chemicals are the ones that do a lot of the damage, whether it be cancer related or heart disease related, or even locally in the area. Those are the chemicals that really cause a lot of the damage. So no, there really is no safe way to smoke.
You mentioned just now about the cigars, and I want to take, not cigars, the pipes. I want to take you up on that. Cigars and pipes, you know, supposedly these are for the higher echelons of society when you have the pipes. Are these safer than the cigarettes themselves?
I would just say it's probably a more expensive way to die. You know, they can be more costly. Okay. But they do not benefit you any more than the cigarette would, and they can cause just as bad damage as the cigarette would. And the combustion of the tobacco is going to release those same chemicals and going to cause the same harm.
Cigarette smoking has often been addictive, or you become addicted to cigarette smoking. What causes that addiction?
Well, addiction is related to the nicotine in the tobacco. Nicotine is a chemical that has a very similar function to some chemicals in the brain. And there's even a receptor on the nerves, that is the holding areas on the nerves that interact with chemicals, that it's called a nicotinic receptor. And the nervous system is built in such a way that in certain pathways, when stimulation takes place, those pathways now become, if you want to call them, broader, okay, more functional. And the body has a way of decreasing that stimulation level by lowering the receptors so that you do not get damaged, if you want to call it that way. And so you need a bigger dose of the chemical to have the same effect. And so that feeling that people get from smoking, that they begin to crave, now they will need to have more of the nicotine to get that same effect, and that leads to a habitual use of it.
Are there persons who are more predisposed to cigarette smoking or addiction to cigarettes?
As far as being more predisposed to addiction, I wouldn't say that people are more predisposed to addiction. In terms of more predisposed to cigarette smoking that can lead to an addiction, well, one particularly susceptible group that has been found is the young people. The young people seem to be particularly susceptible to the advertising campaigns for cigarette smoking. Young people seem to be particularly susceptible to peer pressure because your buddies are doing it. And there's a period of your life where it is your friends that seem to have far more influence than even your parents. And to be in the in-group, to be cool, means that, you know, you have to partake, all right? And in the partaking, you suddenly find yourself addicted. And that addiction might well exceed the time period of when you're young. And so it becomes a lifelong problem.
I have a confession to make, Doc. I hope you would not fire me or have me fired from JC24. But I took a pull of cigarette when I was much younger. So that's some time ago. All things have passed away. But when I did that, my body reacted violently to that. Is that natural, or is it just me? Maybe the Lord is speaking to me, and that's how He's trying to get me off of it.
Well, the Lord does speak to us in various and sundry ways. But there is a chemical basis to what you experience. And indeed, a number of the chemicals are just particularly noxious to that part of our body. The airway is very sensitive. And one of the important aspects of our airway is to keep it clear, because an obstructed airway means you can't breathe. And so our coughing reflex is just part of that. Our body does not want anything blocking the airway. And so some of these noxious chemicals from smoking, when they get in, they stimulate those centers, and you will naturally try to get rid of them. So yes, your body is trying to save you from yourself.
Have mercy.
But unfortunately, what is found is that it doesn't take very long for the burgeoning smoker to get over those negative effects. And within a week or two, they can actually overcome those and become an addict.
Rest assured I did not continue. So I hope you have forgiven me, sir, for what I have done in the past. What about secondhand smoke? Secondhand smoke, how dangerous is it? We have heard so much about it. Is it as deadly as the first-hand smoker, or is it maybe overplayed or overstated?
Well, some of the effects of smoking are particularly dose-related. Lung cancer seems to be strongly correlated with length of exposure, and the longer you're a smoker, the bigger the risk. Cardiovascular disease, however, does not seem to have that strong dose-dependent relationship, so that small exposure can have significant effects on your heart health over time. And the same noxious chemicals that the primary smoker is inhaling, the secondary smoker can be at risk for, and it is found that those who get the secondary smoke suffer a lot of the ill effects that those of the primary smoker does.
It seems a bit unfair that I will be suffering the sins that you may have committed.
It is unfair. However, that is something to keep in mind for those of you who are smokers, because people tend to have this idea that it's my body, I can do with it whatever I please. And the truth of it is that it will not only affect you. It's a selfish way to look at it. It will affect those in your household or those in your workplace who now have to smell that smoke.
Or perhaps I can tell the smoker, once he's within an enclosed environment, that it's all right for you to inhale, just don't exhale. Pregnant women, how does smoking affect pregnant women? Is it different from how it will affect them if they're not pregnant, and how does it affect their babies?
Well,
unborn?
Similarly to what we just spoke about, again, there's a little bit of selfishness there. The poor fetus, the poor developing child really has no say, but the effects on the child can be lifelong. It is well known that the developing children in a pregnant woman often are born premature and low birth weight. And both prematurity and low birth weight seem to be predisposing factors to some of the chronic diseases that we see down the line. It wouldn't be manifest until the child has grown up to his 40s or her 50s, but they are there. And there are developmental issues, especially intellectually, mentally, that child will now have as a result of having that exposure to the cigarette smoke. In addition to that, cigarette smoking mothers, cigarette smoking pregnant women can be susceptible to an abrupted placenta. That is where the placenta just completely separates from the wall of the uterus, and that pregnancy can be lost. Increased rate of stillbirths, where the child is born dead. So if you want to take home a healthy child, and I don't think there are any parents who wouldn't want to do that, a word to the wise is sufficient.
We are speaking here with Dr. Larry Griffith on the subject of huffing and puffing. Yes, the subject is about smoking. You'll want to grab all your relatives and friends, call somebody and tell them to listen as we continue our discussion on smoking. We'll be right back.
I'll forever trust in you. Jesus all the way.
JC24/7.
The shaking continues. Darkness is being overcome by the light.
Grand Morality March on February the 21st from 4 p.m. from the Yolan Pompey Ground, Princestown. Come march with us, your Seventh-day Adventist friends, showing your support and solidarity for principles and virtues we all hold dear. And on February the 22nd from 8 a.m. for a free market day at an Adventist church near you. Bring out your produce and let's exchange for a change. For further information, please contact 760-1763. Be a part of the shaking.
JC24-7.
And I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow my own house in. That's if I continue smoking. We continue our discussion with Dr. Larry Griffith on this issue of smoking. Doc, I don't smoke cigarette, I don't smoke the pipe, I don't smoke tobacco, but I choose to chew it. I should be all right.
Well, one would think so, given our earlier discussion about the noxious chemicals that are liberated by the combustion of tobacco. But that route allows the chemicals to get into the body very quickly.
I still can't get away, kind of.
But the chewing can allow some of those chemicals to get into the body just a little bit more slowly.
Okay.
And the evidence suggests that heart disease is still a big problem in those who chew the tobacco. What might change, for instance, is the profile of the cancers. So while the smokers might find that they have a high rate of lung cancer, the chewers might find a much higher rate of oral cancer, that's mouth cancers, tongue cancers, of the gums and the throat and so forth.
Okay. Well, I have been smoking for a long time. I have been enjoying the habit for a long time, and I want to kick it because I've listened to you, and now I want to say, take this habit from me. How do I go about it? Is there hope for me, Doc? Help me out here. Is there hope for the addict?
Well, the good news is that the body has a remarkable ability to heal itself and to recover, even from cigarette smoking. Now, if one has cancer, well, quitting the smoking is not going to make the cancer go away, unfortunately, and that's a road that you're now going to have to travel. But some of the other effects of cigarette smoking are significantly reversed, some of them earlier, some of them much later. For instance, one of the big problems is wound healing. Now, I'm a surgeon, wound healing. I'm a surgeon, and for instance, we know that patients who have hernia repairs often will not do as well if they are smokers. And hernias repairs wounds that are under a lot of tension, and they can break down and allow the hernia to recur. And so we discourage the patients from smoking before their repair. And what we know is that after 2 months of quitting, their ability to repair their wounds is just about as good as a person who didn't. And as you go down in time, over the months, over the years, the cardiovascular risks can decrease. And there are statistics that even suggest that if a person quits, who's been maybe smoking 10, 15 years, quits by 35 years of age, their life expectancy might be just as good as the person who never smoked.
Kidding me.
So it's worth doing it. And there are ways and means to try. There are people who have the willpower and can quit cold turkey, as we say. But for the vast majority of people, those withdrawal symptoms, those cravings, tend to peg them back. And every year, more than 40–50% of people try to quit and fail. So it is good to make use of an assistance program. And assistance programs generally will try to effect the change in two ways. There's the behavioral aspect, and there is the medical aspect.
What is the assistance program?
Well, assistance program like smoking cessation programs that might be available. In Trinidad, we have one, for instance, in the Cora Hospital. And one aspect of the treatment will be finding better ways to cope. After all, people smoke often for a reason. Maybe it is that the relaxation that they get. And truthfully, life is stressful for all of us. We all have obstacles that we have to deal with. But trying to overcome the obstacles by artificially creating an environment in your head where the obstacle is just not so bad, but then you start creating other obstacles later on that you have to overcome is not the solution. And so we have to find better ways of coping on one hand. But even with the better ways of coping, you still have the chemical dependence part of the problem to overcome. And so because the chemical addiction is primarily related to the nicotine, some of these treatments, which are broadly termed nicotine replacement therapy, involve various mechanisms by which lower doses of nicotine are given to the person. So the person is sort of gently let down from the addiction, almost like a parachute.
Right, okay. you're kind of weaned off of it. And does it really work? Because at some point you will still want it. If you are weaned off, could you still, if you are gently given or given gentle doses of it, is there a point at which you will no longer want it?
For a significant number of people, yes.
Okay.
They will be weaned off. But like any habit, the pathway is present in the brain. And there are people who so-called fall off the bandwagon. Maybe you happen to go into a bar and somebody's smoking, and that whiff of smoke will turn back on those pathways, and you might start to crave it again. And so avoidance is key, as with any habit, of the thing that has drawn you to the problem in the first place.
So the smoker, the perennial smoker, can quit.
Absolutely, and has happened for thousands and thousands of people every year.
Could part of the process be the influence he has as well, where he associates, whom he associates with, that kind of thing? Would that also have impact as to the time frame in which he quits?
Well, yes, because peer pressure never goes away.
Right. Okay.
And if your idea of having a good time is say, having a drink with some buddies and lighting it up, then being in that environment will only encourage you to do so. And it has been found that people who smoke have a higher disposition, a predisposition to be substance abusers. And there's a very strong link between smoking and alcoholism.
Right.
To the point that people who are heavy smokers, it is postulated they should be screened for alcoholism. They tend to go hand in hand. And so, yes, maybe you have to change your friends, or maybe you'll have to go fishing instead of going to the bar if you're really serious about being healthy and making that change permanent.
Doc, I did some research and I realized, and I'm sure you don't have to do this research, but I realized that there are some chemicals in cigarettes that are very poisonous, like cyanide, benzene, methanol, acetylene, ammonia, and other poisonous gases. Yet people who might be aware of this still go ahead and smoke. Is it through lack of ignorance? Is it because of ignorance? Or is it that people are arrogant? What causes people to still smoke despite the fact that they know what smoking can do?
Well, smoking is different for different people. I can tell you that when I was training to be a surgeon, there was a head and neck surgeon who used to do an operation we call a commando procedure for people who have cancers in the mouth from smoking many times, and they would remove the tongue, the whole jaw, and their face is very disfigured, and then they'd have to take a bone from the leg and refashion a new jaw for the person. And after 8 hours of that kind of an operation, I'd watch the surgeon walk out and light a cigarette. So education is not always the answer. I know patients who because of cancers of the mouth, have had to have tracheostomies. That is, a new airway is put in the neck because the mouth cannot be used, or the nose cannot be used to breathe properly, and they try to smoke through that. Right. The damage and insult was not great enough. So I don't think that it really is always education. For young people, I think a lot of it is education. But for people who are of age, they make choices. Especially those who have started smoking as adults. And it gets back to what I said earlier. I think you have to get to the root cause of the problem. What is it that the person is lacking? What is it the person that is not able to adapt to or deal with that they are now using the smoking as a crutch for? And I think if we can get down to that issue and solve it, then perhaps we can keep a lot of people from getting trapped in that habit.
What about those who have never taken a smoke and they are growing up in a teenage life? You said, I think you may have referred to the fact that a lot of young people would have started even as early as 13 years. How do you go about discouraging them from huffing and puffing and smoking their life away? What would you tell them?
Well, some of the things that have worked include education in schools. All right? Some of us health professionals really have to take the time of going into schools and teaching the children about the long-term effects. As we do that while they're making those critical decisions. And we have to address some of the issues that they have to deal with. I mean, they're kids. They have friends who are doing it. And we have to sort of train them and help them to understand some of these long-term ramifications of what they do. Right. Of course, some of them are coming from families where it is acceptable. And perhaps, you know, from a government level, from a social work level, we have to find a long-term way to deal with that.
Right.
There are no easy answers for things like that. But I think we can do what we can do.
Right.
And I think education for the young people in particular is going to be a cornerstone for that. Another thing that some Western countries like the United States have had to deal with has to deal with advertising.
Okay.
Okay? So advertising is a big lure for these young people. And certain types of advertising had to be banned.
Okay.
Okay? Taxation on cigarettes is an area where we have found a tremendous decrease
Right.
in some of these countries from smoking because it is an expensive habit.
Right.
All right?
Right.
And the economies we know are always in flux.
Okay.
Our oil prices are falling.
There you go.
It becomes a little bit more of a decision
Right.
in the budget to go and buy that cigarette.
Okay.
And so sometimes increasing the cost of the cigarette can make a difference. And in California, for instance, it was shown where they took some of those taxes from the cigarettes and used them in these programs, that it was a significant drop-off in the smoking in the population.
Doc, in the closing moments, there's somebody or some people who are looking at this telecast. They've heard you. They're struggling. They want to get rid of the cigarette and they need some guidance as to how do they go about. If there's a step-by-step program, how would you advise such a person? I want you to look at the camera and talk to that person or persons. Let them know what they can do to get rid of this habit.
Well, I can say as a physician, dealing with people having to amputate limbs, for instance, because of lack of circulation, or deal with wounds that will not close for months, that it is worth it. But a person has to like living. You have to enjoy living. And you have to understand that enjoyment of living doesn't equate to harming yourself. And there's a lot to live for. What we have to remember is that things like cigarettes, smoke, alcohol, and these other things, they take time to cause the damage. But once the damage is done, people like myself and others like me in the healthcare system who may want to help you may not be able to do so. And you will have to go through the process. And I think that if you really realize that life is worth living, start to make those decisions now. There are helps in place to enable you to do so. As I said, Cora Hospital, which is in the North Central Regional Health Authority, has a smoking cessation group. And I know that there are others further down south in Trinidad. Avail yourselves of these processes and quit smoking. You will be thankful for it in time.
Thank you, Doc. I have no knowledge of your age, but you look good. It could be because you're not smoking.
I think that has something to do with it.
Keep up the habits. Keep up the habit of not smoking. Romans 13:14, I think, puts things in perspective when it says, "Put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts of huffing and puffing." To replace one bad habit, start practicing a good one. You will see how easy it is for you to drop not just the cigarette, but drop off that whole lifestyle of yours. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and I hope it will encourage you to put away everything that destroys your body. And hope to see you again on JC24/7.